Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
This part of the course is a continuing discussion on structure and process issues in running an organization. From the preceding elaboration, you would be clear on what is the content of the word structure in an organizational content. Similarly, the content of the word processes, and in tandem came the concept of a procedure, and we tried to zero in on the use of these concepts so far as the efficiency and effectiveness parameters of an organization are concerned. We would like to continue this discussion for recognition that by convention, two types of structures are supposed to be just exposed to each other. One is a horizontal structure, the other is a vertical structure. Let me show to you a written description of the horizontal versus the vertical structure, then I will go ahead to explain it to you. A horizontal process manages coordination across steps in a continuous or interdependent work process that spans departments, functions and organizations. Horizontal processes are designed around workflows of teams such as new product development or customer order fulfillment. Now, as you notice here, processes are following structures. A horizontal processes manage coordination across the steps in a continuous or interdependent work process that spans departments, functions and organizations. So, processes are somewhat like a one over the other situation, running parallel to a structural process. So, when process flows take place, it ends by linking up departments, functions and organizations. Processes are flowing on top of the structures, linking up in a horizontal manner. Horizontal processes have the advantage of a workflow of the team such as new product development, customer order fulfillment and becomes very helpful there. Vertical processes manage the allocation of scarce resources. Now, vertical will be top down, and the definition goes on to explain that vertical processes allocate the resources of funds and talent. They are usually business planning and budgeting processes. The needs of different departments are centrally collected and priorities are decided for the budgeting and allocation of resources to capital, research and development and training. Please read this statement carefully for me to explain its implications. In the earlier case, you noticed that horizontal processes are running across the structures, linking product development concerns, customer order fulfillment across teams. They span across departments, functions. As distinguished from that, vertical processes run top down with the prime purpose of allocating resources. In this case, processes are running through structures, and the flow will be at different levels. In other words, processes and structures, or structures and processes, need not necessarily run parallelly. They can run parallelly, or they can run cross section wise, depending upon the function which is at stake. Organizational processes required by flat and boundaryless structures require decentralization of authority, information sharing, diffusion and distribution of competency, and redefinition and reallocation of awards. Once one gets into this area, one is entering into a little more complex formulations. If the structures are by definition malleable or indeed boundaryless, because the nature of the technology operating in the organization is such. Illustratively, it is an information technology related firm, or it is a software related firm in any given sector, say telecom sector, or to put it quite simply, an organization dealing with a technology which is not necessarily sequential from lower level of sophistication to a higher level of sophistication, but across the organization linking up different competencies from one end of the spectrum to another in a lateral fashion, then what kind of processes would operate there? If you go back to the explanation offered in the preceding presentation on structure and processes, you will recall that I did talk of hierarchies when I talked of structures, and you will recall that I cautioned you that all structures are not necessarily hierarchical. We are now at a stage where we notice that structures will determine the centralization or otherwise of authority. If it is a flat organization, there will be inherent decentralization of authority. If it is a vertical organization, pyramidal in nature, it would be prone to a centralization of authority. And the way authority is positioned in the structure will determine the process flows, which is why I showed you a shot of organizational processes required by flat and boundaryless organization structures, which had 4 elements. And I am in the process of explaining to you the need to recognize that there is decentralization of authority, just as there is a need to appreciate that the nature of technology in a given organization can be such that the relationships amongst jobs would be flat. Now, if there is decentralization of authority and a flat structure, this has implication for information processes also. There will be higher information sharing in a flat structure than in a centralized structure. In a flat structure also, there will be a greater diffusion and distribution of competency. But then again, a flat structure does not become superior to a hierarchical structure. All that it says is that the flat structure is more amenable to certain type of product development, and a hierarchical structure is more prone to certain other types of product development. In either case, the issue becomes that of redefinition and reallocation of resources, reallocation of awards, and that is how an organization becomes alive. Which really brings us to the crucial question which we are trying to handle in this presentation. After all, what is the nature of interaction between structure and processes? Let me show to you explanation of the structure process interface, and I would read this out to you, then leave it there for a while, so that you can read it and internalize it. Let me read it to you. In order for the organization to function effectively, the structure and process must be clearly defined, with a great deal of consideration put into the development, so as to ensure concurrent and interactive development. Concurrent and interactive meaning as the structure, so the process, both recognize each other's existence. Interactive development, imaginative processes need to exist to support the structure, and this is the key to this whole thought. Ensure concurrent and interactive development. Imaginative processes need to exist to support the structure. Even if the structure and processes are functioning differently, they would be functioning differently to be supportive to each other, not to be obstructive to each other. There are quite often alternatives to the way a current team is operating. Please note this statement very carefully. There are quite often alternatives to the way a current team is operating. In all likelihood, people will be able to work more collaboratively and interdependently when such alternatives are brought forth. Detailed analysis must preempt implementation of any process to ensure that such attention is paid to the relationship between people and processes. The submission here is a simple one. Collaboration and interdependency are the defining principles of operating organizations, and in a while I will be talking to you about operating organizations. Detailed analysis must preempt, please note this, detailed analysis must preempt implementation of any process. In other words, implementation of a process is a cognitively conscious process, though I must hasten to add, if you do not do it consciously, processes will start operating on their own. The difference being, a process which starts functioning on its own will take time to be mapped, and a process which has been put in place consciously with an analysis which has preceded it will have a map which is already available, therefore, makes possible interventions which are more effective and which are more scientific. And then, just as structures are operated by people, processes are operated by people. Therefore, people or the human resources of an organization have an interactory relationship with both structure and processes. Thus, we can conclude that activities of organizations are performed through defined processes and structures. This is an important concept which needs to be underscored. Thus, we can conclude that activities of organizations are performed through defined processes and structures. Drawing an analogy with the human body again, the structure represents the anatomy, while the processes represent the physiology of an organization. This again is a very important concept as we start winding up this part of the discussion. If you compare organizations with a human body, the structure represents the anatomy and the processes represent the physiology of an organization. The structural aspects include job design, work levels, authority relationships and work methods. This is really the content of organization theory and practice, which is a whole specialization in organization management, or for those of you who are still dated in mid-80s of the last century, organizational behavior. Without getting into that kind of a debate, all I wish you to register is structural considerations include job design, work levels, authority relationships and work methods. The listing is not exhaustive. In this course, we shall be devoting at least 2 hours looking at design issues of organizations. And as I have already shared with you, I will be presenting to you certain schematic diagrams of organizations, which will help you understand how organizations actually could work. The processes include the nature of information flow, communications in organization, control and coordination functions. Now, again within the limitations of the time space of this course, just as we will not be looking at all the subcomponents of structures, we will be not looking at all the subcomponents of processes. which has to do with information flows, communication, control, coordination functions. But then it is important at your level of understanding of the subject matter to recognize that the word both structure and process are umbrella concepts which operationally for the organization has many sub-elements. For those of you who are a little more ambitious, will find in the bibliography a reference to a book, Organization Development Systems. That book does elaborate upon both the structure and the process in a little more detail. In a detailed manner enough to help you understand what has information flows to do with organization functioning, or what has communication to do with organization functioning. This presentation is made at the bottom line of information and knowledge you must pick up if you want to appear literate in organization management and human resources management with reference to engineering systems. But for an advanced level understanding, obviously you will have to back it up with some reading of your own. It is pertinent to mention here that the behavioral aspects of any organization, such as motivation, leadership, job satisfaction, to influence the processes. Again, in this course we will be touching upon some of them. It is pertinent to mention here that behavioral aspects of an organization, call them human resources management if you will, such as motivation, we will be touching upon that, leadership will be touching upon that. We will not be talking of job satisfaction etc. in any great detailed manner, again for the paucity of time, but then this is the stage where you must be informed that these elements do influence the processes and do create an impact on the character of the organization. So, to sum up this part of the presentation, what is it that you need to internalize? There are at least 7 organization related issues. They are not issues of organization structure. Please notice the difference very carefully. They are organization structure related issues. They are displayed on the screen. Please take a look, then I will elaborate. So, what are the organization structure related issues? Hierarchy. Hierarchy has to be right. And what is the right hierarchy? Right hierarchy is a hierarchy which delivers the results to fulfill the objectives for which the organization has been created. There are organizations in Saudi Arabia which have 27 levels. There is nothing in the grammar of organizations which says this is wrong. Normally, public sector organizations in India have anywhere between 9 to 11 levels. So, what is the difference? If you have 9 level organization, and you have a 35 to 36 year career, then other things being normal, you can expect a promotion every 4th year. So, that is when you go back home and tell all those whom you wish to impress, or all those who are dependent upon you, or those with whom you have some sentiments to share, you have been promoted, but you will not be able to do it much quicker than once in 3 or 4 years. But if you have 27 levels, you can do it almost every 2nd year. The question therefore remains, is this news of promotion which is central to good functioning of an organization, or does hierarchy have a logic of its own which has to do with the production process? Now, that is not a question which I can answer with any great clarity in this presentation, but the fact remains there has to be a right hierarchy and the numbers can vary. There is a span of control and each manager has a span of control where the reporting patterns get back to him. It is my case that span of control must match the span of attention. If your span of control is too wide and your span of attention is not that wide, then please remember your effectiveness will be to that extent low. If you remember the presentation on the screen, the third element was line and staff function design. Now, you should know the difference between line and staff function. Line is usually flat, staff is usually hierarchical, but irrespective, a mixture of the line and staff function makes an organization function, but not without accounting for the nature of the management information system. This can be distributed, this can be centralized, but however and whatever that may be, it is important to recognize that information is like the central nervous system of a human body. Information flow decides the effectiveness of response and coping capability of the limbs of an organization. It can be distributed, it can be centralized, it can be lodged at one place, it can be lodged at the point of action, and there are different models available for the structure of the information systems. Again, this is not the best place to get into it, but yes, this is the sort of place where you need to be briefed that the nature of the information systems affect the structure and processes of the organization. Information flows decides which of the components of the structure are defunct, therefore, can be lopped off, or better still, which of them are alive, fruitful, and therefore, need to be reinforced. The distribution of authority and accountability is also a central paradigm for structures and processes to operate. Strictly speaking, there can be no authority without accountability, but then those in authority do not always appear keen to render accounts of performance. But these are the ironies of human nature, and where we stand here and now is not the place to try to resolve these ironies. The way to go about it would be to accept these ironies and see, like a practitioner of decision theory, decision practice, problem solving? To what extent can we breathe life into authority and accountability, so that the entire organizational system is more responsive, more proactive, more self-renewing, and therefore more capable of taking care of itself. Work methods and job designs are the two intervening variables which impart to any organization its character. As I have alerted you in the lecture following this one, I will be discussing concerns of design, and while discussing concerns of design, we will be also referring to job designs. And if you are referring to job designs and if you are referring to design, clearly work methods will be under review. And finally, after having done some reflection on right hierarchy, span of control, line and staff designs, line and staff functions design, nature of management information systems, distribution of authority and accountability, work method and job design, performance appraisal, a quick recap of the issues which was shown to you on screen a little while ago, being shown to you again, and we are here trying to link up the preceding 6 issues here and focus it on performance appraisal and design, because performance appraisal systems are really the process of review and feedback to organizations on their state of health. They are a process of review and feedback to their organization on their relevance to the organization, and why indeed the organization should retain them at all. Indeed, I am of the view that it is this feedback loop which really determines the way the organization is poised to meet its future. It is another matter that a perfect performance appraisal system is a theoretical reality, but a lot of things in life have to contend with the suboptimal and continue dealing with it, because the ideal remains the objective to target, and it helps also to shape better one's own plan of work. So, what are the process related issues which we should be thinking of, and what process related issues determine the effectiveness of an organization? Let us see a quick listing. How should decision making function be carried out in an organization? There is no ideal answer to this question. That decision making function in any organization is the most desirable, which is the most productive to its survival and growth. If there is a higher level of acceptability of that decision, even better. But organizations which put acceptability above inputs to growth usually come to grief. This is where the Zeus pattern occasionally also makes sense. If you are the leader, there can be and there will be occasions where refractions and distortions of the decision making processes tabled before you will seek your intervention for correction, and that is what the leadership function is about. Then there is the question of to what extent is it possible to grant autonomy to subunits and to what degree centralized control is necessary. This question here, to what extent is it possible to grant autonomy to the subunits and to what degree centralized control is necessary. Again, one of those classical dilemmas of management, which really have no answer. What is the relationship between autonomy and centralized control? The relationship is very much like the shoreline and the sea. You do not know where one stops and the other begins, and in any case it varies from high tide to low tide, from 1 hour to another. It has to do with the speed with which waves come in. It has to do with the strength of the tide. Indeed, the classical dimension is the speed with which the earth is itself rotating. So, the relationship between the shoreline and the sea is never an autonomous variable. The relationship between autonomy and centralized control is never an autonomous variable, but it has to be sensitively and proactively handled. To get back to the slide, what would be the communication patterns in the organization from top to bottom or from bottom to top across horizontal levels within group or other groups? Difficult to answer. One will have to pitch in, keeping in mind the results which alternate modes of communication caused. One will have to keep in mind that the central purpose of communication is to create within the organization goal centeredness of energy and effort, and externally a proper presentation of the organizational image, so that the objectives of the organization are well met. The questions continue and the answers are not always present. How should the coordination take place amongst constituent units of the organization? What should be the processes adopted to do so, or the question which follows? How should control be exercised? What control mechanism should be instituted in the organization? The questions of coordination and control, again very judgmental, but if one thing is clear, that is, if anything can be clear, to lead an organization, one has to rise beyond prejudices, bury the past, look to the future, and take the decisions which in your private moments between yourself and yourself, you are capable of saying, yes, that was the right decision to take. I took that decision without prejudice. I took that decision without bias, and that was the best I was capable of. If you can answer yes to that question, you have understood proactively and wisely the use of structure and processes as a leader, and we will be talking about leadership in course of time. A proposition to you for you to consider. Let us read it together. The issue of structures cannot be addressed without having considerations for the issues of processes or vice versa. So, the two are interdependent. The processes are the activities which are carried out for achieving the goals of the organizations. These processes cannot flow by themselves. These need an appropriate channel for their smooth functioning and flow. The structures provide these channels. One structure can provide channel for one or more processes. Similarly, one process can flow through one or more structures. That is not a very complicated sentence. It is not a play on words. The ideas are basically simple. We shall walk through it once again for the sake of clarity. The issues of structures cannot be addressed without having considerations for the issue of processes or vice versa. The processes are the activities which are carried out for achieving the goals of organizations. These processes cannot flow by themselves. They need an appropriate channel for their smooth functioning and flow. Structures provide these channels. One structure can provide channels for one or more processes. Similarly, one process can flow through one or more structures. If you have got the hang of this statement, you are with us in understanding the nature of structure and processes in organizations. Here you have a schematic diagram between structures and processes and which activity of which segment links up with which other activity. You will notice that hierarchy is linked with power, span of control, a structural function, is linked with leadership, a process function. Authority and accountability, a structural consideration, is linked up with decision making, a process consideration. Performance appraisal system is linked up with control. Line and staff function is linked up with coordination. Work designs are linked up with controls. Under processes, we have got communications, and deliberately this is left blank, because you can link up MIS with control, you can link up work design with change, and the diagram speaks for itself. But communication, while a process function, covers just about everything in the organization. This is not a chart to swear by, but this is certainly a chart which, for a person who is trying to get a foothold into management, helps to make some sense of what may appear a very large maze of variables, which to a person beginning the understanding of the process appear incomprehensible. So, hierarchy and power, span of control and leadership, authority and accountability and decision making, performance appraisal systems and control, line and staff functions and coordination and change, work design and control. MIS also deals with control, and finally, communication, which links up with everything. With that, you will notice that there is a certain fuzziness around performance appraisal systems. At a certain level, it will be linked up with decision making. On a certain level, it is made up of control in terms of its linking up. Under the process, you have had 8 variables. Under the structures, you have had 7 variables. We have 1 extra on the process variables because communication is listed there, but arrows you have only 6, and that is because communication does not have a counterpart. The linkage of MIS with process issues is fuzzy, and so is the linkage of performance appraisal with a single process issue fuzzy. It is difficult to identify one-to-one relationship for MIS and performance under appraisal systems, which are structural variables with process issues. But once you recognize these 2 exceptions on the structure side, for which it is very difficult to find a counterpart on the process side, that is a single counterpart on the process side. You will also recognize that for at least one variable on the process side, that is communication, it is very difficult to find one single variable on the structure side, but by and large I believe the point is made. To conclude then, we shall talk of certain process variables, control, coordination, implementation, and wrap up with systems. Control requires surveys, it surveys the total activity of the implementation elements. It should be able to generate data on what is going on inside the process, and now to integrate the implementation without eroding their autonomy. So far as the coordination process is concerned, in the absence of this, there will be duplication of activities, non-uniformity of operations. The function is not to command, but to damp oscillations. By damp oscillations is meant reduce oscillations. They reflect decisions they do not make. And finally, implementation. These are execution activities related to resource conversion, that is implementation. Resource support, customer acquisition, and vendor development. You will notice that by the time we come to implementation, I am talking of operational aspects of resource support, customer acquisition through phrases like resource, customer acquisition, and vendor development. So, processes lay emphasis on coordination and implementation, and the summation is in the form of systems. Systems are the sum total of interrelated and interacting structures as well as processes working together towards a common goal. Systems consist of structure and processes, and therefore, integrated systems would require you to have a proper understanding of structure and processes. But all in all, please remember that where management is an art, trying to atomize structures, trying to atomize processes may contribute towards a certain degree of cognitive clarity, but when you are actually operating an organization, these lines of division are neither neat nor clear nor always identifiable. In initiating the study of any subject matter, you begin with seeking tremendous clarity of the variables, the relationships, and a scientific categorization. In real terms, life is not amenable to such clarity or such specificity. Ultimately, you have to feel your way through, which is where management is simultaneously a science and an art, and perhaps the best caption we can give to management, that it is the craft of the practitioner.